Chapter 22 of Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4, by Giorgio Vasari, translated by Gaston de VERE. Life of Raffaello da Urbino, Raffaello Sanzio, Part 2. In like manner, on the same ceiling, in the angles of the pendatives, he executed 4 scenes, which he drew and colored with great diligence, but with figures of no great size. In one of these, that near the Theology, he painted the sin of Adam, the eating of the apple, which he executed with a most delicate manner. And in the second, near the Astrology, is a figure of that science setting the fixed stars and planets in their places. In the next, that belonging to Mount Parnassus, is Marcius, whom Apollo has caused to be bound to a tree and flayed. And on the side of the scene, wherein the decretals are given, there is the judgment of Solomon, showing him proposing to have the child cut in half. These 4 scenes are all full of expression and feeling, and executed with excellent draftsmanship and with pleasing and gracious coloring. But now, having finished with the vaulting, that is, of that apartment, it remains for us to describe what he painted below the things mentioned above, wall by wall. On the wall towards the Belvedere, where there are Mount Parnassus and the Fount of Helicon, he made round that mount a laurel wood of darkest shadows, in the verdure of which one almost sees the leaves quivering in the gentle zephyrs, and in the air are vast numbers of naked loves, most beautiful in feature and expression, who are plucking branches of laurel, and with them making garlands, which they throw and scatter about the mount. Over the whole, in truth, there seems to breathe a spirit of divinity, so beautiful are the figures, and such the nobility of the picture, which makes whoever studies it with attention marvel how a human brain, by the imperfect means of mere colors and by excellence of draftsmanship, could make painted things appear alive. Most lifelike also are those poets who are seen here and there about the mount, some standing, some sitting, some writing, and others discoursing, and others again singing or conversing together in groups of 4 or 6, according as it pleased him to distribute them. There are portraits from nature of all the most famous poets, ancient and modern, and some only just dead, or still living in his day, which were taken from statues or medals, and many from old pictures, and some, who were still alive, portrayed from life by himself. And to begin with one end, there are Ovid, Virgil, Aeneas, Tibullus, Catullus, Propertius, and Homer, the last name blind and chanting his verses with uplifted head, having at his feet one who is writing them down. Next, in a group, are all the 9 Muses and Apollo, with such beauty in their aspect and such divinity in the figures, that they breathe out a spirit of grace and life. There also are the learned Sappho, the most divine Dante, the gracious Petrarca, and the amorous Boccaccio, who are wholly alive, with Tibaldeo, and an endless number of other moderns. And this scene is composed with much grace and executed with diligence. On another wall he made a heaven with Christ, Our Lady, St. John the Baptist, the Apostles, the Evangelists, and the Martyrs enthroned on clouds, with God the Father sending down the Holy Spirit over them all, and particularly over an endless number of saints who are below, writing the Mass and engaged in disputation about the host, which is on the altar. Among these are the 4 doctors of the Church, who have about them a vast number of saints, such as Dominic, Francis, Thomas Aquinas, Bonaventura, Scotus, and Nicholas of Lyra, with Dante, Fra Girolamo, Savonarola, of Ferrara, and all the Christian theologians, with an infinite number of portraits from nature, and in the air are 4 little children who are holding open the Gospels. Anything more graceful or more perfect than these figures no painter could create, since those saints are represented as seated in the air in a circle, and so well that in truth, besides the appearance of life that the colouring gives them, they are foreshortened and made to recede in such a manner that they would not be otherwise if they were in relief. Moreover, their vestments show a rich variety, with most beautiful folds in the draperies, and the expressions of the heads are more divine than human, as may be seen in that of Christ, which reveals all the clemency and devoutness that divinity can show to mortal men through the medium of painting. For Raffaello received from nature a particular gift of making the expressions of his heads very sweet and gracious, of which we have proof also in the Madonna, who, with her hands pressed to her bosom, gazing in contemplation upon her Son, seems incapable of refusing any favour, not to mention that he showed a truly beautiful sense of fitness, giving a look of age to the expressions of the holy patriarchs, simplicity to the apostles, and faith to the martyrs. Even more art and genius did he display in the holy Christian doctors, in whose features, while they make disputation throughout the scene in groups of 6 or 3 or 2, there may be seen a kind of eagerness and distress in seeking to find the truth of that which is in question, revealing this by gesticulating with their hands, making various movements of their persons, turning their ears to listen, knitting their brows, and expressing astonishment in many different ways, all truly well varied and appropriate, save only the 4 doctors of the Church, who, illumined by the Holy Spirit, are unravelling and expounding, by means of the Holy Scriptures, all the problems of the Gospels, which are held up by those little boys who have them in their hands as they hover in the air. On another wall, where the other window is, on one side he painted Justinian, giving the laws to the doctors to be revised, and above this, temperance, fortitude, and prudence. On the other side he painted the Pope, giving the canonical decretals, for which Pope he made a portrait from life of Pope Julius, and beside him Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici, who became Pope Leo, Cardinal Antonio di Monte, and Cardinal Alessandro Farnese, who afterwards became Pope Paul III, with other portraits. The Pope was very well satisfied with this work, and in order to make the panelling worthy of the paintings, he sent to Monte Oliveto di Chiusura, a place in the territory of Siena, for Fra Giovanni da Verona, a great master at that time of perspective views in inlaid woodwork, who made there not only the panelling, right round, but also very beautiful doors and seats, wrought with perspective views, which brought him great favour, rewards, and honour from the Pope. And it is certain that in that craft there was never any man more able than Giovanni, either in design or in workmanship, of which we still have proof in the sacristy, wrought most beautifully with perspective views in woodwork of Santa Maria in Organo in his native city of Verona, in the choir of Monte Oliveto di Chiusuri, and that of San Benedetto at Siena, in the sacristy of Monte Oliveto at Naples, and also in the choir of the chapel of Paolo da Tolosa in the same place, executed by that master. Wherefore he well deserved to be esteemed and held in very great honour by the convent of his order, in which he died at the age of 68 in the year 1537. Of him, as of a person truly excellent and rare, I have thought it right to make mention, believing that this was due to his talents, which, as will be related in another place, led to many beautiful works being made by other masters after him. But to return to Raffaello, his powers grew in such a manner that he was commissioned by the Pope to go on to paint a second room, that near the Great Hall. And at this time, when he had gained a very great name, he also made a portrait of Pope Julius in a picture in oils, so true and so lifelike, that the portrait caused all who saw it to tremble, as if it had been the living man himself. This work is now in Santa Maria del Popolo, together with a very beautiful picture of Our Lady, painted at the same time by the same master, and containing the Nativity of Jesus Christ, wherein is the Virgin laying a veil over her Son, whose beauty is such, both in the air of the head and in all the members, as to show that he is the true Son of God. And no less beautiful than the child is the Madonna, in whom, besides her supreme loveliness, there may be seen piety and gladness. There is also a Joseph, who, leaning with both hands on a staff, and lost in thoughtful contemplation of the King and Queen of Heaven, gazes with the adoration of a most saintly old man. Both these pictures are exhibited on days of solemn festival. By this time Raffaello had acquired much fame in Rome, but although his manner was graceful and held by all to be very beautiful, and despite the fact that he had seen so many antiquities in that city and was forever studying, nevertheless he had not yet given thereby to his figures that grandeur and majesty which he gave to them from that time onward. For it happened in those days that Michelangelo made the terrifying outburst against the Pope in the chapel, of which we will speak in his life, whence he was forced to fly to Florence. Whereupon Bramante, having the keys of the chapel, allowed Raffaello, who was his friend, to see it, to the end that he might be able to learn the methods of Michelangelo. And the sight of it was the reason that Raffaello straightway repainted, although he had already finished it, the prophet Isaiah, that is to be seen in San Agostino at Rome, above the St. Anne by Andrea Sansovino, in which work, by means of what he had seen of Michelangelo's painting, he made the manner immeasurably better and more grand, and gave it greater majesty. Wherefore Michelangelo, on seeing afterwards the work of Raffaello, thought, as was the truth, that Bramante had done him that wrong on purpose, in order to bring profit and fame to Raffaello. Not long after this, Agostino Chigi, a very rich merchant of Siena, who was much the friend of every man of excellence, gave Raffaello the commission to paint a chapel. And this he did, because a short time before Raffaello had painted for him, in his softest manner, in a loggia of his palace, now called the Chigi, in the Trastevere, a Galatea, in a car on the sea, drawn by 2 dolphins, and surrounded by tritons and many sea gods. Raffaello then, having made the cartoon for that chapel, which is at the entrance of the church of Santa Maria della Pace, on the right hand, as one goes into the church, by the principal door, executed it in fresco in his new manner, which was no little grander and more magnificent than his earlier manner. In this painting, Raffaello depicted some prophets and sibyls before Michelangelo's chapel had been thrown open to view, although he had seen it, and in truth it is held to be the best of his works, and the most beautiful among so many that are beautiful. For in the women and children that are in it, there may be seen a marvellous vivacity and perfect colouring, and this work caused him to be greatly esteemed, both in his lifetime and after his death, being the rarest and most excellent that Raffaello executed in all his life. Next, spurred by the entreaties of a chamberlain of Pope Julius, he painted the panel for the high altar of the Ara Coeli, wherein he made a Madonna in the sky, with a most beautiful landscape, a St. John, a St. Francis, and a St. Jerome, represented as a cardinal, in which Madonna may be seen a humility and a modesty truly worthy of the Mother of Christ. And besides the beautiful gesture of the child as he plays with his mother's hand, there is revealed in St. John that penitential air which fasting generally gives, while his head displays the sincerity of soul and frank assurance appropriate to those who live away from the world and despise it, and in their dealings with mankind make war on falsehood and speak out the truth. In like manner, the Saint Jerome has his head uplifted, with his eyes on the Madonna, deep in contemplation, and in them seem to be suggested all the learning and knowledge that he showed in his writings, while with both his hands he is presenting the chamberlain in the act of recommending him to her, which portrait of the chamberlain is as lifelike as any ever painted. Nor did Raffaello fail to do as well in the figure of St. Francis, who, kneeling on the ground, with one arm outstretched and with his head upraised, is gazing up at the Madonna, glowing with a love in tone with the feeling of the picture, which, both by the lineaments and by the colouring, shows him melting with affection and taking comfort and life from the gracious sight of her beauty and of the vivacity and beauty of her son. In the middle of the panel, below the Madonna, Raffaello made a little boy standing, who is raising his head toward her and holding an inscription, than whom none better or more graceful could be painted, what with the beauty of his features and the proportionate loveliness of his person. And in addition, there is a landscape, which is singularly beautiful in its absolute perfection. Afterwards, going on with the apartments of the palace, he painted a scene of the miracle of the sacramental corporal of Orvieto, or of Bolsena, whichever it may be called. In this scene there may be perceived in the face of the priest who is saying Mass, which is glowing with a blush, the shame that he felt on seeing the host turned into blood on the corporal on account of his unbelief. With terror in his eyes, dumbfoundered and beside himself in the presence of his hearers, he seems like one who knows not what to do, and in the gesture of his hands may almost be seen the fear and trembling that a man would feel in such a case. Round him Raffaello made many figures, all varied and different, some serving the Mass, others kneeling on a flight of steps, and all, bewildered by the strangeness of the event, are making various most beautiful movements and gestures, while in many, both men and women, there is revealed a belief that they are to blame. Among the women is one who is seated on the ground, at the foot of the scene, holding a child in her arms, and she, hearing the account that another appears to be giving her of the thing that has happened to the priest, turns in a marvellous manner as she listens to this, with a womanly grace that is very natural and lifelike. On the other side, he painted Pope Julius hearing that Mass, a most marvellous work, wherein he made a portrait of Cardinal di San Giorgio, with innumerable others. And the window opening he turned to advantage by making a flight of steps, in such a way that all the painting seems to be one whole. Nay, it appears as if, were that window space not there, the work would in no wise have been complete. Wherefore it may be truly credited to him, that in the invention and composition of every kind of painted story, no one has ever been more dexterous, facile, and able than Raffaello. This he also proved in another scene in the same place, opposite to the last named, of St. Peter in the hands of Herod, and guarded in prison by men-at-arms, wherein he showed such a grasp of architecture and such judgment in the buildings of the prison, that in truth the others after him seem to have more confusion than he has beauty. For he was ever seeking to represent stories just as they were written, and to paint in them things gracious and excellent, as is proved in this one by the horror of the prison, wherein that old man is seen bound in chains of iron between the two men-at-arms, by the deep slumber of the guards, and by the dazzling splendor of the angel, which, in the thick darkness of the night, reveals with its light every detail of the prison, and makes the arms of the soldiers shine resplendent, in such a way that their burnished luster seems more lifelike than if they were real, although they are only painted. No less art and genius are there in the action of St. Peter. When freed from his chains, he goes forth from the prison, accompanied by the angel, wherein one sees in the face of the saint a belief that it is rather a dream than a reality. And so also terror and dismay are shown in some other armed guards without the prison, who hear the noise of the iron door, while a sentinel with a torch in his hand rouses the others, and as he gives them light with it, the blaze of the torch is reflected in all their armor, and all that its glow does not reach is illumined by the light of the moon. This composition Raffaello painted over the window, where the wall is darkest, and thus, when you look at the picture, the light strikes you in the face, and the real light conflicts so well with the different lights of the night in the painting that the smoke of the torch, the splendor of the angel, and the thick darkness of the night seem to you to be wholly real and natural, and you would never say that it was all painted. So vividly did he express this difficult conception. In it are seen shadows playing on the armor, other shadows projected, reflections, and a vaporous glare from the lights, all executed with darkest shade, and so well that it may be truly said that he was the master of every other master, and as an effective night among all those that painting has ever produced, this is the most real and most divine, and is held by all the world to be the rarest. On one of the unbroken walls also he painted the divine worship and the Ark of the Hebrews, with the candlestick, and likewise Pope Julius driving avarice out of the temple, a scene as beautiful and as excellent as the night described above. Here, in some bearers who are carrying Pope Julius, a most lifelike figure, in his chair, are portraits of men who were living at that time. And while the people, some women among them, are making way for the Pope so that he may pass, one sees the furious onset of an armed man on horseback, who, accompanied by two on foot, and in an attitude of the greatest fierceness, is smiting and riding down the proud Heliodorus, who is seeking at the command of Antiochus to rob the temple of all the wealth stored for the widows and orphans. Already the riches and treasures could be seen being removed and taken away, when, on account of the terror of the strange misfortune of Heliodorus, so rudely struck down and smitten by the three figures mentioned above, although this being a vision, they are seen and heard by him alone, behold, they are all dropped and upset on the ground, those who were carrying them falling down through the sudden terror and panic that had come upon all the followers of Heliodorus. Apart from these may be seen the holy Onias, the high priest, dressed in the robes of office, with his eyes and hands raised to heaven, and praying most fervently, being seized with pity for the poor innocents who were thus nearly losing their possessions, and rejoicing at the help that he feels has come down from on high. Besides this, through a beautiful fancy of Raffaello's, one sees many who have climbed onto the sockles of the column bases, and, clasping the shafts, stand looking in most uncomfortable attitudes, with a throng of people showing their amazement in many various ways and awaiting the result of this event. This work is, in every part, so stupendous that even the cartoons are held in the greatest veneration, wherefore Messer Francesco Mazzini, a gentleman of Cesena, who, without the help of any master, but giving his attention by himself from his earliest childhood, guided by an extraordinary instinctive nature to drawing and painting, has painted pictures that have been much extolled by good judges of art, possesses among his many drawings, and some ancient reliefs in marble, certain pieces of the cartoon which Raffaello made for this story of Heliodorus, and he holds them in the estimation that they truly deserve. Nor will I refrain from saying that Messer Niccolo Mazzini, who has given me information about these matters, is as much a true lover of our arts as he is a man of real culture in all other things. But to return to Raffaello, on the ceiling above these works he then executed 4 scenes: God appearing to Abraham and promising him the multiplication of his seed, the sacrifice of Isaac, Jacob's ladder, and the burning bush of Moses, wherein may be recognized no less art, invention, draftsmanship, and grace than in the other works that he painted. While the happy genius of this craftsman was producing such marvels, the envy of fortune cut short the life of Julius II, who had fostered such abilities and had been a lover of every excellent work. Whereupon a new pope was elected, in Leo X, who desired that the work begun should be carried on, and Raffaello thereby soared with his genius into the heavens and received endless favours from him, fortunate in having come upon a prince so great, who had by the inheritance of blood a strong inclination for such an art. Raffaello, therefore, thus encouraged to pursue the work, painted on the other wall the coming of Attila to Rome, in his encounter at the foot of Monte Mario with Leo III, who drove him away with his mere benediction. In this scene, Raffaello made St. Peter and St. Paul in the air, with swords in their hands, coming to defend the church. And while the story of Leo III says nothing of this, nevertheless it was thus that he chose to represent it. Perchance out of fancy, for it often happens that painters, like poets, go straying from their subject in order to make their work the more ornate, although their digressions are not such as to be out of harmony with their first intention. In those apostles may be seen that celestial wrath and ardour which the divine justice is wont often to impart to the features of its ministers, charged with defending the most holy faith, and of this we have proof in Attila, who is seen riding a black horse with white feet, and a star on its forehead, as beautiful as it could be, for in the attitude of the utmost terror he throws up his head and turns his body in flight. There are other most beautiful horses, particularly a dappled jennet, which is ridden by a figure that has all the body covered with scales after the manner of a fish, which is copied from the column of Trajan, wherein the figures have armour of that kind, and it is thought that such armour is made from the skins of crocodiles. There is Monte Mario, all aflame, showing that when soldiers march away, their quarters are always left a prey to fire. He made portraits from nature, also in some mace-bearers accompanying the Pope, who are marvellously lifelike, as are the horses on which they are riding, and the same is true of the retinue of cardinals, and of some grooms who are holding the palfrey on which rides the Pope in full pontificals, a portrait of Leo X, no less lifelike than those of the others, with many courtiers, the whole being a most pleasing spectacle, and well in keeping with such a work, and also very useful to our art, particularly for those who have no such objects at their command. End of chapter 22. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 23 of Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4 by Giorgio Vasari, translated by Gaston de VERE. Life of Raffaello da Urbino, Raffaello Sanzio, Part 3. At this same time he painted a panel containing Our Lady, St. Jerome, robed as a cardinal, and an angel Raphael, accompanying Tobias, which was placed in San Domenico at Naples, in that chapel wherein is the crucifix that spoke to St. Thomas Aquinas. For Signor Leonardo da Carpi, Lord of Meldola, who is still alive, although more than 90 years old, he executed a picture that was most marvellous in colouring, and of a singular beauty, for it is painted with such force, and also with a delicacy so pleasing, that I do not think it is possible to do better. In the countenance of the Madonna may be seen such a divine air, and in her attitude such a beauty, that no one would be able to improve her. And he made her with the hands clasped, adoring her Son, who is seated on her knee, caressing a St. John, a little boy who is adoring him, in company with St. Elizabeth and Joseph. This picture was once in the possession of the very Reverend Cardinal da Carpi, son of the said Signor Leonello, and a great lover of our arts, and it should be at the present day in the hands of his heirs. Afterwards, Lorenzo Pucci, Cardinal of Santi Quattro, having been created Grand Penitentiary, Raffaello was favoured by him with a commission to paint a panel for San Giovanni in Monte at Bologna, which is now set up in the chapel wherein lies the body of the Blessed Elena dall'Olio, in which work it is evident how much grace, in company with art, could accomplish by means of the delicate hands of Raffaello. In it is a Santa Cecilia, who, entranced by a choir of angels on high, stands listening to the sound, wholly absorbed in the harmony, and in her countenance is seen that abstraction which is found in the faces of those who are in ecstasy. Scattered about the ground, moreover, are musical instruments, which have the appearance of being not painted, but real and true, and such also are some veils that she is wearing, with vestments woven in silk and gold, and below these a marvellous hair shirt. And in St. Paul, who has the right arm leaning on his naked sword, and the head resting on the hand, one sees his profound air of knowledge, no less well expressed than the transformation of his pride of aspect into dignity. He is clothed in a simple red garment by way of mantle, below which is a green tunic, after the manner of the apostles, and his feet are bare. There is also St. Mary Magdalene, who is holding in her hands a most delicate vase of stone, in an attitude of marvellous grace. Turning her head, she seems full of joy at her conversion, and indeed, in that kind of painting, I do not think that anything better could be done. Very beautiful likewise are the heads of St. Augustine and St. John the Evangelist. Of a truth, other pictures may be said to be pictures, but those of Raffaello, life itself. For in his figures the flesh quivers, the very breath may be perceived, the pulse beats, and the true presentment of life is seen in them, on which account this picture gave him, in addition to the fame that he had already, an even greater name. Wherefore many verses were written in his honour, both Latin and in the vulgar tongue, of which, in order not to make my story longer than I have set out to do, I will cite only the following. Pingit sola alii referantque, coloribus ora, caeciliae as Raphael atque animum explicuit. After this, he also painted a little picture with small figures, which is likewise at Bologna, in the house of Count Vincenzo Ercolano, containing a Christ after the manner of Jove in heaven, surrounded by the four evangelists, as Ezekiel describes them, one in the form of a man, another as a lion, the third an eagle, and the fourth an ox, with a little landscape below to represent the earth, which work in its small proportions is no less rare and beautiful than his others in their greatness. To the Counts of Canossa in Verona he sent a large picture of equal excellence, in which is a very beautiful nativity of our Lord, with a daybreak that is much extolled, as is also the St. Anne, and indeed the whole work, which cannot be more highly praised than by saying that it is by the hand of Raffaello da Urbino. Wherefore those counts rightly hold it in supreme veneration, nor have they ever consented, for all the vast prices that have been offered to them by many princes, to sell it to any one. For Bindo Altoviti he made a portrait of him when he was a young man, which is held to be extraordinary, and likewise a picture of Our Lady, which he sent to Florence, and which is now in the palace of Duke Cosimo, in the chapel of the new apartments, which were built and painted by me, where it serves as altarpiece. In it is painted a very old Saint Anne, seated and holding out to Our Lady her Son, the features of whose countenance, as well as the whole of his nude form, are so beautiful that with his smile he rejoices whoever beholds him. Besides which, Raffaello depicted, in painting the Madonna, all the beauty that can be imparted to the aspect of a virgin, with the complement of chaste humility in the eyes, honour in the brow, grace in the nose, and virtue in the mouth. Not to mention that her raiment is such as to reveal infinite simplicity and dignity. And indeed, I do not think that there is anything better to be seen than this whole work. There is a nude St. John seated with a female saint, who is likewise very beautiful, and for the background there is a building in which he painted a linen-covered window that gives light to the room wherein are the figures. In Rome, he made a picture of good size in which he portrayed Pope Leo, Cardinal Giulio de' Medici, and Cardinal de' Rossi. In this, the figures appear to be not painted but in full relief. There is the pile of the velvet, with the damask of the Pope's vestments shining and rustling, the fur of the lining soft and natural, and the gold and silk so counterfeited that they do not seem to be in color but real gold and silk. There is an illuminated book of parchment, which appears more real than the reality, and a little bell of wrought silver, which is more beautiful than words can tell. Among other things also is a ball of burnished gold on the Pope's chair, wherein are reflected, as it were a mirror, such is its brightness, the light from the windows, the shoulders of the Pope, and the walls round the room. And all these things are executed with such diligence that one may believe, without any manner of doubt, that no master is able, or is ever likely to be able, to do better. For this work the Pope was pleased to reward him very richly, and the picture is still to be seen in Florence, in the guardaroba of the Duke. In like manner, he executed portraits of Duke Lorenzo and Duke Giuliano, with a perfect grace of coloring not achieved by any other than himself, which are in the possession of the heirs of Ottaviano de' Medici at Florence. Thereupon there came to Raffaello a great increase of glory, and likewise of rewards, and for this reason, in order to leave some memorial of himself, he caused a palace to be built in the Borgo Nuovo at Rome, which Bramante executed with castings. Now the fame of this most noble craftsman, by reason of the aforesaid works, and many others, having passed into France and Flanders, Albrecht Dürer, a most marvellous German painter and an engraver of very beautiful copper plates, rendered tribute to Raffaello out of his own works, and sent to him a portrait of himself, a head, executed by him in gouache, on a cloth of fine linen, which showed the same on either side, the lights being transparent and obtained without lead white, while the only grounding and colouring was done with watercolours, the white of the cloth serving for the ground of the bright parts. This work seemed to Raffaello to be marvellous, and he sent him, therefore, many drawings executed by his own hand, which were received very gladly by Albrecht. That head was among the possessions of Giulio Romano, the heir of Raffaello in Mantua. Raffaello, having thus seen the manner and the engravings of Albrecht Dürer, and desiring on his own behalf to show what could be done with his work by such an art, caused Marcantonio Bolognese to make a very thorough study of the method, and that master became so excellent that Raffaello commissioned him to make prints of his first works, such as the drawing of the Innocents, a Last Supper, the Neptune, and the Santa Cecilia being boiled in oil. Marcantonio afterwards made for Raffaello a number of other engravings, which Raffaello finally gave to Baviera, his assistant, who had charge of a mistress whom Raffaello loved to the day of his death. Of her he made a very beautiful portrait, wherein she seemed wholly alive. And this is now in Florence, in the possession of that most gentle of men, Matteo Batti, a Florentine merchant, and an intimate friend of every able person, and particularly of painters, who treasures it as a relic, on account of the love that he bears to art, and above all to Raffaello. And no less esteem is shown to the works of our arts and to the craftsmen by his brother, Simon Batti, who, besides being held by us all to be one of the most loving spirits that show favour to the men of our professions, is held in estimation by me in particular as the best and greatest friend that ever man loved, after a long experience, not to mention the good judgment that he has and shows in matters of art. But to return to the engravings, the favour shown by Raffaello to Baviera was the reason that there afterwards sprang up Marco da Ravenna and a host of others, insomuch that the dearth of copper engravings was changed into that abundance that we see at the present day. Thereupon Ugo da Carpi, having a brain inclined to ingenious and fanciful things, and showing beautiful invention, discovered the method of wood engraving, whereby, with 3 blocks, giving the middle values, the lights and the shadows, it is possible to imitate drawings in chiaroscuro, which was certainly a thing of beautiful and fanciful invention, and from this also there afterwards came an abundance of prints, as will be related with greater detail in the life of Marcantonio Bolognese. Raffaello then painted for the monastery of the monks of Monte Oliveto, called Santa Maria dello Spasmo at Palermo, a panel picture of Christ bearing the cross, which is held to be a marvellous work. In this may be seen the impious ministers of the crucifixion, leading him with wrath and fury to his death on Mount Calvary, and Christ, broken with agony at the near approach of death, has fallen to the ground under the weight of the tree of the cross, and bathed with sweat and blood, turns toward the Maries, who are in a storm of weeping. Moreover, there is seen among them Veronica, who stretches out her arms and offers him a cloth, with an expression of the tenderest love, not to mention that the work is full of men-at-arms, both on horseback and on foot, who are pouring forth from the gate of Jerusalem with the standards of justice in their hands, in various most beautiful attitudes. This panel, when completely finished, but not yet brought to its resting place, was very near coming to an evil end, for the story goes that after it had been put on shipboard, in order that it might be carried to Palermo, a terrible storm dashed against a rock the ship that was carrying it, in such a manner that the timbers broke asunder, and all the men were lost, together with the merchandise, save only the panel, which, safely packed in its case, was washed by the sea onto the shore of Genoa. There, having been fished up and drawn to land, it was found to be a thing divine, and was put into safe keeping, for it had remained undamaged and without any hurt or blemish, since even the fury of the winds and the waves of the sea had respect for the beauty of such a work. The news of this being then bruited abroad, the monks took measures to recover it, and no sooner had it been restored to them by the favour of the Pope, that they gave satisfaction, and that liberally, to those who had rescued it. Thereupon it was once more put on board ship, and brought at last to Sicily, where they set it up in Palermo, in which place it has more fame and reputation than the Mount of Vulcan itself. While Raffaello was engaged on these works, which having to gratify great and distinguished persons, he could not refuse to undertake, not to mention that his own private interests prevented him from saying them nay, yet for all this he never ceased to carry on the series of pictures that he had begun in the papal apartments and halls, wherein he always kept men who pursued the work from his own designs, while he himself, continually supervising everything, lent to so vast an enterprise the aid of the best efforts of which he was capable. No long time passed, therefore, before he threw open that apartment of the Borgia Tower, in which he had painted a scene on every wall, 2 above the windows and 2 others on the unbroken walls. In one was the burning of the Borgo Vecchio of Rome, when all other methods having failed to put out the fire, Saint Leo IV presents himself at the loggia of his palace and extinguishes it completely with his benediction. In this scene are represented various perils. On one side are women who are bearing vessels filled with water in their hands and on their heads, whereby to extinguish the flames, and their hair and draperies are blown about by the terrible fury of a tempestuous wind. Others, who are seeking to throw water on the fire, are blinded by the smoke and wholly bewildered. On the other side, after the manner of Virgil's story of Anchises being carried by Aeneas, is shown an old sick man, overcome by his infirmity and the flames of the fire, and in the figure of the young man are seen courage and strength, and great effort in all his limbs, under the weight of the old man, who lies helpless on the young man's back. He is followed by an old woman, with bare feet and disordered garments, who is flying from the fire, and a little naked boy runs before them. On the top of some ruins, likewise, may be seen a naked woman, with hair all dishevelled, who has her child in her hands, and is throwing him to a man of her house, who, having escaped from the flames, is standing in the street on tiptoe, with arms outstretched to receive the child wrapped in swathing bands. Wherein the eager anxiety of the woman to save her son may be recognized no less clearly than her torment in the peril of the fierce flames, which are already licking around her feet. And no less suffering is evident in him who is receiving the child, both for its sake and on account of his own fear of death. Nor is it possible to describe the imagination that this most ingenious and most marvelous craftsman showed in a mother with her feet bare, her garments in disorder, her girdle unbound, and her hair dishevelled, who has gathered her children before her, and is driving them on, holding part of her clothing in one hand, that they may escape from the ruins, and from that blazing furnace, not to mention that there are also some women who, kneeling before the Pope, appear to be praying to His Holiness that he should make the fire cease. The next scene is from the life of the same Saint Leo IV, wherein Raffaello, depicting the port of Ostia, occupied by the fleet of the Turks, who had come to take the Pope prisoner. The Christians may be seen fighting against that fleet on the sea, and already there has come to the harbor an endless number of prisoners who are disembarking from a boat and being dragged by the beard by some soldiers who are very beautiful in features and most spirited in their attitudes. The prisoners, dressed in the motley garb of galley slaves, are being led before St. Leo, whose figure is a portrait of Pope Leo X. Here Raffaello painted His Holiness in pontificals between Cardinal Santa Maria in Portico, who was Bernardo de Vizzo of Bibbiena, and Cardinal Giulio de' Medici, who afterwards became Pope Clement. Nor is it possible to describe in detail the beautiful conceptions that this most ingenious craftsman showed in the expressions of the prisoners, wherein one can recognize without speech their grief and the fear of death. In the first of the other two scenes is Pope Leo X consecrating the most Christian king, Francis I of France, chanting the Mass in his pontificals and blessing the oil for the anointing of the king, and likewise the royal crown. There, besides the great number of cardinals and bishops in their robes who are assisting, he portrayed from life many ambassadors and other persons, and also some figures dressed in the French fashion according to the style of that time. In the other scene, he painted the crowning of the same king, wherein are portraits from life of the Pope and of Francis, one in armour, and the other in his pontificals, besides which all the cardinals, bishops, chamberlains, esquires, and grooms of the chamber are seated in due order in their places, as is the custom in the chapel, all in their robes and portrayed from life, among them being Giannozzo Pandolfini, Bishop of Troia, a close friend of Raffaello, with many others who were distinguished at that time. Near the king is a little boy kneeling who is holding the royal crown, a portrait of Ippolito de' Medici, who afterwards became cardinal and vice-chancellor, a man of great repute, and much the friend not only of this art, but of all others, to whose blessed memory I acknowledge a vast obligation, seeing that my first steps, such as they were taken under his auspices. It is not possible to write of every detail in the works of this craftsman, wherein every least thing, although dumb, appears to have speech, save only of the bases executed below these pictures, with various figures of defenders and benefactors of the Church, and various terminal figures on either side of them, the whole being wrought in such a manner that everything reveals spirit, feeling, and thought, and with such a harmony and unity of colouring that nothing better can be conceived. And since the ceiling of that apartment had been painted by Pietro Perugino, his master, Raffaello would not destroy it, moved by respect for his memory and by the love that he bore to the man who had been the origin of the rank that he held in his art. Such was the greatness of this master that he kept designers all over Italy, at Pollaiuolo, and even in Greece, and he was forever searching out everything of the good that might help his art. Now, continuing his work, he also painted a hall wherein were some figures of the apostles and other saints and tabernacles executed in terretta, and there he caused to be made by Giovanni da Udine, his disciple, who has no equal in the painting of animals, all the animals that Pope Leo possessed, such as the chameleon, the civet cats, the apes, the parrots, the lions, the elephants, and other beasts even more strange. And besides embellishing the palace greatly with grotesques and varied pavements, he also gave the designs for the papal staircases, as well as for the loggie, begun by the architect Bramante, but left unfinished on account of his death, and afterwards carried out with the new design and architecture of Raffaello, who made for this a model of wood, with better proportion and adornment than had been accomplished by Bramante. The Pope, wishing to demonstrate the greatness and magnificence of his generous ambition, Raffaello made the designs for the ornaments in stucco and for the scenes that were painted there, and likewise for the compartments. And as for the stucco and the grotesques, he placed at the head of that work Giovanni da Udine, and the figures he entrusted to Giulio Romano, although that master worked but little at them, and he also employed Giovanni Francesco, il Bologna, Perino del Vaga, Pellegrino da Modena, Vincenzo da San Gimignano, and Polidoro da Caravaggio, with many other painters, who executed scenes and figures and other things that were required throughout that work, which Raffaello caused to be completed with such perfection, that he even sent to Florence for pavements by the hand of Luca della Robbia. Wherefore it is certain that with regard to the paintings, the stucco ornaments, the arrangement, or any of the beautiful inventions, no one would be able to execute or even to imagine a more marvellous work, and its beauty was the reason that Raffaello received the charge of all the works of painting and architecture that were in progress in the palace. It is said that the courtesy of Raffaello was such that he prevailed upon the masons, in order that he might accommodate his friends, not to build the walls absolutely solid and unbroken, but to leave above the old rooms below various openings and spaces for the storage of barrels, flasks, and wood, which holes and spaces so weakened the lower part of the masonry that afterwards they had to be filled in, because the whole was beginning to show cracks. He commissioned Gian Barile to adorn all the doors and ceilings of woodwork with a good number of carvings, which he executed and finished with beautiful grace. He gave the architectural design for the Vigna of the Pope, footnote, Villa Madama, end footnote, and for many houses in the Borgo, in particular for the palace of Messer Giovanni Battista dall'Aquila, which was a very beautiful work. He also designed one for the Bishop of Troia, who had it built in the Via di San Gallo at Florence. For the Black Friars of San Sisto in Piacenza, he painted the picture for their high altar, containing the Madonna with Saint Sisto and Saint Barbara, a truly rare and extraordinary work. He executed many pictures to be sent into France, and in particular for the king, a Saint Michael fighting with the devil, which was held to be a marvellous thing. In this work he painted a fire-scarred rock, to represent the centre of the earth, from the fissures of which are issuing the sulphurous flames, and in Lucifer, whose scorched and burned limbs are painted with various tints of flesh colour, could be seen all the shades of anger that his venomous and swollen pride calls up against him who overbears the greatness of him who is deprived of any kingdom where there might be peace, and doomed to suffer perpetual punishment. The opposite may be perceived in the Saint Michael, clad in armour of iron and gold, who, although he is painted with a celestial air, yet has valor, force, and terror in his aspect, and has already thrown Lucifer down and hurled him backwards with his spear. In a word, this work was of such a kind that he won for it, and rightly, a most honourable award from that king. He made portraits of Beatrice of Ferrara and other ladies, and in particular that of his own mistress, with an endless number of others. End of chapter 23. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 24 of Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4, by Giorgio Vasari, translated by Gaston de VERE. Life of Raffaello da Urbino, Raffaello Sanzio, Part 4. Raffaello was a very amorous person, delighting much in women, and ever ready to serve them, which was the reason that, in the pursuit of his carnal pleasures, he found his friends more complacent and indulgent toward him than perchance was right. Wherefore, when his dear friend Agostino Chigi commissioned him to paint the first loggia in his palace, Raffaello was not able to give much attention to his work on account of the love that he had for his mistress, at which Agostino fell into such despair that he so contrived, by means of others, by himself, and in other ways, as to bring it about, although only with difficulty, that this lady should come to live continually with Raffaello in that part of the house where he was working. And in this manner the work was brought to completion. For this work he made all the cartoons, and he coloured many of the figures in fresco with his own hand. And on the ceiling he made the Council of the Gods in Heaven, wherein in the forms of the gods are seen many vestments and lineaments copied from the antique, and executed with very beautiful grace and draughtsmanship. In like manner he made the Marriage of Psyche, with ministers serving Jove, and the Graces scattering flowers over the table. In the spandrels of the vaulting he executed many scenes, in one of which is Mercury with his flute, who, as he flies, has all the appearance of descending from heaven, and in another is Jove, with an air of celestial dignity, kissing Ganymede, and in another, likewise, lower down, is the car of Venus and the Graces, with Mercury drawing Psyche up to heaven, with many other scenes from the poets in the other spandrels. And in the spherical triangles of the vaulting above the arches, between the spandrels, are many most beautiful little boys in foreshortening, hovering in the air and carrying all the instruments of the gods. Jove's lightnings and thunderbolts, the helmet, sword, and shield of Mars, Vulcan's hammers, the club, and the lion's skin of Hercules, the caduceus of Mercury, Pan's pipes, and the agricultural rakes of Vertumnus. All are accompanied by animals appropriate to their character, and the whole work, both as picture and as poem, is truly beautiful. Round these scenes he caused Giovanni da Udine to make a border of all kinds of flowers, foliage, and fruits, in festoons which are as beautiful as they could be. Raffaello made the designs for the architecture of the stables of the Chigi, and the design for the chapel of the aforesaid Agostino in Santa Maria del Popolo, wherein, besides painting it, he made arrangements for the erection of a marvellous tomb, causing Lorenzetto, a sculptor of Florence, to execute 2 figures, which are still in his house, in the Macello dei Corbi at Rome. But the death of Raffaello, followed by that of Agostino, brought it about that this work was given to Sebastiano Viniziano. Meanwhile, Raffaello had risen to such greatness that Leo X ordained that he should set to work on the great hall on the upper floor, wherein are the victories of Constantine, and with this he made a beginning. A fancy likewise took the Pope to have some very rich tapestries made in gold and floss silk, whereupon Raffaello drew and coloured with his own hand, of the exact form and size, all the cartoons which were sent to Flanders to be woven, and the tapestries, when finished, were brought to Rome. This work was executed so marvellously that it arouses astonishment in whoever beholds it, wondering how it could have been possible to weave the hair and beards in such detail, and to give softness to the flesh with mere threads. And it is truly rather a miracle than the work of human art, seeing that in these tapestries are animals, water, and buildings, all made in such a way that they seem to be not woven, but really wrought with the brush. The work cost 70,000 crowns, and it is still preserved in the Papal Chapel. For Cardinal Colonna he painted a St. John on canvas, for which, on account of its beauty, that cardinal had an extraordinary love. But, happening to be attacked by illness, he was asked by Messer Jacopo da Carpi, the physician who cured him, to give it to him as a present. And because of this desire of Messer Jacopo, to whom he felt himself very deeply indebted, he gave it up. It is now in the possession of Francesco Benintendi in Florence. For Giulio de' Medici, cardinal and vice-chancellor, he painted a panel picture to be sent into France of the Transfiguration of Christ, at which he laboured without ceasing, and brought it to the highest perfection with his own hand. In this scene he represented Christ transfigured on Mount Tabor, at the foot of which are the 11 disciples awaiting him. There may be seen a young man possessed by a spirit, who has been brought thither in order that Christ, after descending from the mountain, may deliver him, which young man stretches himself out in a distorted attitude, crying and rolling his eyes, and reveals his suffering in his flesh, his veins, and the beat of his pulse, all infected by that malignant spirit, and the colour of his flesh as he makes those violent and fearsome gestures is very pale. This figure is supported by an old man, who, having embraced him and taken heart, with his eyes wide open and the light shining in them, is raising his brows and wrinkling his forehead, showing at one and the same time both strength and fear. Gazing intently, however, at the apostles, he appears to be encouraging himself by trusting in them. Among many women is one, the principal figure in that panel, who, having knelt down before the apostles, and turning her head toward them, stretches her arms in the direction of the maniac, and points out his misery. Besides which, the apostles, some standing, some seated, and others kneeling, show that they are moved to very great compassion by such misfortune. And indeed he made therein figures and heads so fine in their novelty and variety, to say nothing of their extraordinary beauty, that it is the common opinion of all craftsmen that this work, among the vast number that he painted, is the most glorious, the most lovely, and the most divine. For whoever wishes to know how Christ transfigured and made divine should be represented in painting must look at this work, wherein Raffaello made him in perspective over that mount in a sky of exceeding brightness, with Moses and Elias, who, illuminated by a dazzling splendor, burst into life in his light. Prostrate on the ground, in attitudes of great beauty and variety, are Peter, James, and John. One has his head to the earth, and another, shading his eyes with his hands, is defending himself from the rays and intense light of the splendor of Christ. He, clothed in snow-white raiment, with his arms outstretched and his head raised, appears to reveal the divine essence and nature of all the three persons united and concentrated in himself by the perfect art of Raffaello, who seems to have summoned up all his powers in such a manner in order to show the supreme force of his art in the countenance of Christ, that, after finishing this, the last work that he was to do, he never again touched a brush, being overtaken by death. Now, having described the works of this most excellent craftsman, before I come to relate other particulars of his life and death, I do not wish to grudge the labour of saying something for the benefit of the men of our arts about the various manners of Raffaello. He, then, after having imitated in his boyhood the manner of his master Pietro Perugino, which he made much better in draughtsmanship, colouring, and invention, believed that he had done enough, and he recognized, when he had reached a riper age, that he was still too far from the truth. But after seeing the works of Leonardo da Vinci, who had no peer in the expressions of heads, both of men and of women, and surpassing all other painters in giving grace and movement to his figures, he was left marvelling and amazed, and, in a word, the manner of Leonardo pleasing him much more than any other that he had ever seen. He set himself to study it, and abandoning, little by little, although with great difficulty, the manner of Pietro, he sought to the best of his power and knowledge to imitate that of Leonardo. But for all his diligence and study, in certain difficulties he was never able to surpass Leonardo, and although it appears to many that he did surpass him in sweetness and in a kind of natural facility, nevertheless he was by no means superior to him in that sublime groundwork of conceptions and that grandeur of art in which few have been the peers of Leonardo. Yet Raffaello came very near to him, more than any other painter, and above all in grace of colouring. But to return to Raffaello himself, in time he found himself very much hindered and impeded by the manner that he had adopted from Pietro when he was quite young, which he acquired with ease, since it was over-precise, dry, and feeble in draughtsmanship. His being unable to forget it was the reason that he had great difficulty in learning the beauties of the nude and the methods of difficult foreshortenings from the cartoon that Michelangelo Buonarroti made for the Council Hall in Florence, and another might have lost heart, believing that he had been previously wasting his time, and would never have achieved, however lofty his genius, what Raffaello accomplished. But he, having purged himself of Pietro's manner, and having thoroughly freed himself of it, in order to learn the manner of Michelangelo, so full of difficulties in every part, was changed, as it were, from a master once again into a disciple, and he forced himself with incredible study, when already a man, to do in a few months what might have called for the tender age at which all things are best acquired, and for a space of many years. For in truth, he who does not learn in good time right principles and the manner that he wishes to follow, and does not proceed little by little to solve the difficulties of the arts by means of experience, seeking to understand every part and to put it into practice, can scarcely ever become perfect, and even if he does, that can only be after a longer space of time and much greater labour. When Raffaello resolved to set himself to change and improve his manner, he had never given his attention to nudes with that zealous study which is necessary, and had only drawn them from life in the manner that he had seen practised by his master Pietro, imparting to them the grace that he had from nature. He then devoted himself to studying the nude, and to comparing the muscles of anatomical subjects and of flayed human bodies with those of the living, which, being covered with skin, are not clearly defined as they are when the skin has been removed, and going on to observe in what way they acquire the softness of flesh in the proper places, and how certain graceful flexures are produced by changing the point of view, and also the effect of inflating, lowering, or raising either a limb or the whole person, and likewise the concatenation of the bones, nerves, and veins, he became excellent in all the points that are looked for in a painter of eminence. Knowing, however, that in this respect he could never attain to the perfection of Michelangelo, he reflected, like a man of supreme judgment, that painting does not consist only in representing the nude human form, but has a wider field, that one can enumerate among the perfect painters those who express historical inventions well and with facility, and who show fine judgment in their fancies, and that he who, in the composition of scenes, can make them neither confused with too much detail, nor poor with too little, but distributed with beautiful invention and order, may also be called an able and judicious craftsman. To this, as Raffaello was well aware, may be added the enriching those scenes with a bizarre variety of perspectives, buildings, and landscapes, the method of clothing figures gracefully, the making them fade away sometimes in the shadows, and sometimes come forward into the light, the imparting of life and beauty to the heads of women, children, young men, and old, and the giving them movement and boldness according to necessity. He considered also how important is the furious flight of horses in battles, fierceness in soldiers, the knowledge how to depict all sorts of animals, and above all, the power to give such resemblance to portraits that they seem to be alive and that it is known whom they represent, with an endless number of other things, such as the adornment of draperies, footwear, helmets, armor, women's headdresses, hair, beards, vases, trees, grottos, rocks, fires, skies turbid and serene, clouds, rain, lightning, clear weather, night, the light of the moon, the splendor of the sun, and innumerable other things which are called for every moment by the requirements of the art of painting. Pondering over these things, I say, Raffaello resolved, since he could not approach Michelangelo in that branch of art to which he had set his hand to seek to equal, and perchance to surpass him in these others, and he devoted himself, therefore, not to imitating the manner of that master, but to the attainment of a catholic excellence in the other fields of art that have been described. And if the same had been done by many craftsmen of our own age, who, having determined to pursue the study of Michelangelo's works alone, have failed to imitate him, and have not been able to reach his extraordinary perfection, they would not have labored in vain, nor acquired a manner so hard, so full of difficulty, wanting in beauty and coloring, and poor in invention, but would have been able, by aiming at catholicity and at imitation in the other fields of art, to render service both to themselves and to the world. Raffaello, then, having made this resolution, and having recognized that Fra Bartolomeo di San Marco had a passing good method of painting, well-grounded draughtsmanship, and a pleasing manner of coloring, although at times, in order to obtain stronger relief, he made too much use of darks, took from him what appeared to him to suit his need and his fancy, namely, a middle course, both in drawing and in coloring, and mingling with that method certain others selected from the best work of other masters. Out of many manners he made one, which was looked upon ever afterwards as his own, and which was and always will be vastly esteemed by all craftsmen. This was then seen perfected in the Sibyls and Prophets of the work that he executed, as has been related, in Santa Maria della Pace, in the carrying out of which work he was greatly assisted by having seen the paintings of Michelangelo in the chapel of the Pope. And if Raffaello had remained content with this same manner, and had not sought to give it more grandeur and variety, in order to prove that he had as good a knowledge of the nude as Michelangelo, he would not have lost a part of the good name that he had acquired. But the nudes that he made in that apartment of the Borgia Tower, where there is the burning of the Borgo, although they are fine, are not in every way excellent. In like manner, those that were painted likewise by him on the ceiling of the palace of Agostino Chigi in the Trastevere did not give complete satisfaction, for they were wanting in that grace and sweetness which were peculiar to Raffaello, the reason of which, in great part, was the circumstance that he had them coloured by others after his design. However, repenting of this error, like a man of judgment, he resolved afterwards to execute by himself, without assistance from others, the panel picture of the Transfiguration of Christ that is in San Pietro a Montorio, wherein, are all those qualities which, as has already been described, are looked for and required in a good picture. And if he had not employed in this work, as it were, from caprice, printer's smoke black, the nature of which, as has been remarked many times, is to become ever darker with time, to the injury of the other colours with which it is mixed, I believe that the picture would still be as fresh as when he painted it, whereas it now appears to be rather a mass of shadows than aught else. I have thought fit, almost at the close of this life, to make this discourse, in order to show with what labour, study, and diligence this honoured craftsman always pursued his art, and even more for the sake of other painters, to the end that they may learn how to avoid those hindrances from which the wisdom and genius of Raffaello were able to deliver him. I must add this as well, that every man should be satisfied and contented with doing that work to which he feels himself drawn by a natural inclination, and should not seek out of emulation to put his hand to that for which nature has not adapted him. For otherwise he will labour in vain, and often to his own shame and loss. Moreover, where striving is enough, no man should aim at superstriving. Footnote: the use of this word, though perhaps too modern, seems to the translator to be the only way to preserve the play of words in the text. End footnote. Merely in order to surpass those who by some great gift of nature, or by some special grace bestowed on them by God, have performed or are performing miracles in art, for the reason that he who is not suited to any particular work can never reach, let him labour as he may, the goal to which another, with the assistance of nature, has attained with ease. Of this among the old craftsmen we may see an example in Paolo Uccello, who, striving against the limitations of his powers in order to advance, did nothing but go backwards. The same has been done in our own day, no long time since, by Jacopo da Pontormo, and it has been proved by the experience of many others, as we have shown before, and will point out yet again. And this perchance happens because heaven always distributes its favours, to the end that every man may rest content with that which falls to him. But now, having discoursed on these matters of art, perchance at greater length than was needful, let us return to the life and death of Raffaello. He had a strait friendship with Cardinal Bernardo de Vizzo of Bibbiena, who had importuned him for many years to take a wife of his choosing, and Raffaello, while not directly refusing to obey the wishes of the cardinal, had yet put the matter off, saying that he would rather wait till 3 or 4 years had passed. This term came upon Raffaello when he was not expecting it, and he was reminded by the cardinal of his promise, whereupon, seeing himself bound, like the courteous man that he was, he could not break his word, and thus accepted as his wife a niece of that cardinal. And because he was always very ill content with this entanglement, he continued to delay the matter in such a way that many months passed without the marriage being brought to pass. But it was with no dishonourable motive that he did this, for having been so many years in the service of the court, and being the creditor of Leo for a good sum, it had been hinted to him that when the hall on which he was engaged was finished, the Pope proposed to reward him for his labours and abilities by giving him a red hat, of which he had already determined to distribute a good number, and some of them to men of less merit than Raffaello. Meanwhile, pursuing his amours in secret, Raffaello continued to divert himself beyond measure with the pleasures of love, whence it happened that, having on one occasion indulged in more than his usual excess, he returned to his house in a violent fever. The physicians, therefore, believing that he had overheated himself, and receiving from him no confession of the excess of which he had been guilty, imprudently bled him, insomuch that he was weakened and felt himself sinking, for he was in need rather of restoratives. Thereupon he made his will, and first, like a good Christian, he sent his mistress out of the house, leaving her the means to live honourably. Next, he divided his possessions among his disciples, Giulio Romano, whom he had always loved dearly, and the Florentine Giovanni Francesco, called Il Fattore, with a priest of Urbino, his kinsman, whose name I do not know. Then he gave orders that some of his wealth should be used for restoring with new masonry one of the ancient tabernacles in Santa Maria Ritonda, and for making an altar with a marble statue of Our Lady in that church, which he chose as his own place of repose and burial after death, and he left all the rest to Giulio and Giovanni Francesco, appointing as executor of his will Messer Baldassare da Pescia, then Datary to the Pope. Finally, he confessed and was penitent, and ended the course of his life at the age of 37, on the same day that he was born, which was Good Friday. And even as he embellished the world with his talents, so it may be believed does his soul adorn heaven by its presence. As he lay dead in the hall where he had been working, there was placed at his head the picture of the Transfiguration, which he had executed for Cardinal de' Medici, and the sight of that living picture, in contrast with the dead body, caused the hearts of all who beheld it to burst with sorrow. That work, in memory of the loss of Raffaello, was placed by the Cardinal on the high altar of San Pietro a Montorio, and on account of the nobility of his every action, it was held ever afterwards in great estimation. His body received that honourable burial which his noble spirit had deserved, for there was no craftsman who did not weep with sorrow and follow him to the grave. His death was also a great grief to the whole court of the Pope, first because he had held in his lifetime the office of Groom of the Chamber, and likewise because he had been so dear to the Pope that his loss caused him to weep bitterly. O happy and blessed spirit, in that every man is glad to speak of thee, to celebrate thy actions, and to admire every drawing that thou didst leave to us. When this noble craftsman died, the art of painting might well have died also, seeing that when he closed his eyes, she was left, as it were, blind. And now for us who have survived him, it remains to imitate the good, nay, the supremely excellent method bequeathed to us by him as a pattern, and as is called for by his merit, and our obligations to hold a most grateful remembrance of this in our minds, and to pay the highest honour to his memory with our lips. For in truth we have from him art, colouring, and invention harmonized and brought to such a pitch of perfection as could scarcely be hoped for, nor may any intellect ever think to surpass him. And in addition to this benefit that he conferred on art, like a true friend to her, as long as he lived, he never ceased to show how one should deal with great men, with those of middle station, and with the lowest. And indeed, among his extraordinary gifts, I perceive one of such value that I, for my part, am amazed at it, in that heaven gave him the power to produce in our art an effect wholly contrary to the nature of us painters, which was that our craftsmen, I do not mean only the lesser, but also those whose humour it was to be great persons, and of this humour art creates a vast number, while working in company with Raffaello, felt themselves naturally united and in such accord that all evil humours vanished at the sight of him, and every vile and base thought fell away from their minds. Such unity was never greater at any other time than his, and this happened because they were overcome both by his courtesy and by his art, and even more by the good disposition of his nature, which was so full of gentleness and so overflowing with loving kindness that it was seen that the very animals, not to speak of men, honoured him. It is said that if any painter who knew him, and even any who did not know him, asked him for some drawing that he needed, Raffaello would leave his own work in order to assist him, and he always kept a vast number of them employed, aiding them and teaching them with such a love as might have been the due rather of his own children than of fellow craftsmen, for which reason he was never seen to go to court without having with him, as he left his house, some 50 painters, all able and excellent, who kept him company in order to do him honour. In short, he lived not like a painter, but like a prince. Wherefore, O art of painting, thou couldst then esteem thyself indeed most blessed in possessing a craftsman, who, both with his genius and his virtues, exalted thee higher than heaven. Truly happy mightst thou call thyself, in that thy disciples, following in the footsteps of so great a man, have seen how life should be lived, and how important is the union of art and virtue, which, wedded in Raffaello, had strength to prevail on the magnificent Julius II and the magnanimous Leo X, exalted as they were in rank and dignity, to make him their most intimate friend, and show him all possible generosity, insomuch that by their favour and by the wealth that they bestowed upon him, he was enabled to do vast honour both to himself and to art. Blessed also may be called all those who employed in his service, worked under him, since whoever imitated him found that he had reached an honourable haven. And in like manner, all those who imitate his labours in art will be honoured by the world, even as, by resembling him in uprightness of life, they will win rewards from heaven. Raffaello received from Bembo the following epitaph: Deo optimo maximo, Raffaelli sanctio, Johannis filio Urbinati, pictori eminentissimo, veterumque aemulo, cujus spiranteis prope imagineis si contemplere, naturae atque artis foedus facile insperexeris. Julii secundi et Leonis decimi, pontificum maximorum, picturae et architecturae operibus gloriam auxit, vixit annos 37 integer integros, quo die natus est, eo esse deseit. Octavo idus aprilis, millesimo quingentesimo vicesimo. Ille hic est Raphael, timoit quo sospite vinci, rerum magna paranzet, moriente mori. And Count Baldassare Castiglione wrote of his death in the following manner: Quad lacerem corpus medica sana verat arte, her politam stugiis et revocaret aquas. Ad stugias ipse est, raptus epidaurius undas, sic precium vitae mors fuit artifici. Tu quoque dum toto laniatum corpore Romam, componis miro, Raphael ingenio. Atque urbis lacerum fero, igni anisque cadaver, ad vitam antiquaam, iam revocasque decus. Mo visti superam invidiam, indignataque mors est, te derum extinctis, redere posse animam. Et quad longa dies paulatim aboluerat hoc te, mortalis preta lege parare iterum, sic misereu prima cadis intercepte iuventa, debere et morti nostraque nosque mones. End of chapter 24. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 25 of Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4, by Giorgio Vasari, translated by Gaston de VERE. Life of Guglielmo da Marcilla, Guillaume de Marcillac, or the French Prior, French painter and master of glass windows. At this same time, wherein our arts were endowed by God with the greatest felicity that they could possibly enjoy, there flourished one Guglielmo da Marcilla, a Frenchman, who, from his constant residence in Arezzo, and from the affection that he bore to that city, may be said to have chosen it for his country, inasmuch that all men considered and called him an Aretine. And in truth, among the benefits that are derived from ability, one is that from whatever strange and distant region, and from however unknown and barbarous a race a man may come, be he who he may, if only he has a mind adorned with ability and practices some ingenious craft with his hands, no sooner does he make his first appearance in each city to which he turns his steps, demonstrating his worth, than the skill of his hand works so powerfully that his name, passing from lip to lip, in a short time waxes great, and his qualities become very highly prized and honored. And it happens often to a great number of men who have left their country far behind them, that they chance upon nations that are lovers of ability, and of foreigners, where by reason of their upright walk of life they find themselves recognized and cherished in such a manner that they forget the country of their birth and choose a new one for their last resting place. Even so was Arezzo chosen as a final home for Guglielmo, who as a youth in France applied himself to the art of design, and together with that gave attention to glass windows, in which he made figures no less harmonious in colouring than if they had been painted with the greatest beauty and harmony in oils. While in his own country, persuaded by the entreaties of certain of his friends, he was present at the slaying of one who was their enemy, on which account he was forced to assume the habit of a monk in the order of Saint Dominique in France, in order to escape the courts and the hand of justice. But although he remained in that order, yet he never abandoned the study of art. Nay, continuing it, he arrived at the highest perfection. Now, by order of Pope Julius II, a commission was given to Bramante da Urbino to have a number of glass windows made for the palace, whereupon he, making inquiries about the most excellent craftsmen, received information of many who were working at that craft, and among them of some who were executing marvellous works in France. And of these he saw a specimen through the French ambassador, who was then at the court of His Holiness, and who had in the frame of a window in his study a figure executed on a piece of white glass, with a vast number of colours fixed on the glass by the action of fire. Wherefore, by order of Bramante, a letter was written to France, inviting them to come to Rome, and offering them good payments. Thereupon Maestro Claudio, a Frenchman, the head of that art, having received the intelligence, and knowing the excellence of Guglielmo, so went to work with money and fair promises that it was no difficult matter to draw him out of the convent, particularly because Guglielmo, on account of the discourtesy shown to him and the jealousies that there always are among monks, was even more eager to leave it than was Maestro Claudio to get him out. They went therefore to Rome, where the habit of Saint Dominique was changed to that of Saint Peter. Bramante at that time had caused 2 windows of travertine to be made in the palace of the Pope, which were in the hall in front of the chapel, now embellished by a vaulted ceiling by Antonio da San Gallo, and by marvellous stucco work from the hand of Perino del Vaga of Florence. These windows were executed by Maestro Claudio and Guglielmo, although afterwards, during the sack of Rome, they were broken to pieces, in order to extract the lead to make harquebus balls, and they were truly marvellous. In addition to these, they made an endless number of them for the apartments of the Pope, which met with the same fate as the other 2, and even now there is one to be seen in the room containing Raffaello's burning of the Borgo in the Borgia Tower, in which are the angels who are holding the escutcheon of Leo X. They also made 2 windows for the chapel behind the Madonna in Santa Maria del Popolo, with the stories of her life, which are highly praiseworthy examples of that craft. These works brought him no less fame and renown than comfort in life. But Maestro Claudio, being very intemperate in eating and drinking according to the custom of his race, which is a deadly thing in the air of Rome, fell sick of so violent a fever that in 6 days he passed to the other life. Whereupon Guglielmo, left alone and almost like one lost without his companion, painted by himself a window, likewise of glass, in Santa Maria de Anima, the church of the Germans in Rome, which was the reason that Cardinal Silvio of Cortona made him an offer and made a contract with him that he should execute some windows and other works in his native city of Cortona. Wherefore the Cardinal took him in his company to take up his abode in Cortona, and the first work that he executed was the façade of the Cardinal's house on the side toward the piazza, which he painted in chiaroscuro, depicting therein Croton and the other original founders of that city. Thereupon the Cardinal, who saw that Guglielmo was no less upright as a man than excellent as a master of that art, caused him to execute for the Pieve of Cortona the window of the principal chapel, in which he made the Nativity of Christ and the Magi adoring him. Guglielmo was a man of fine spirit and intelligence, and of very great mastery in handling glass, and particularly in so distributing the colours that the brightest should come in the foremost figures, those in the other figures being darker in proportion as they receded, in which point he was a rare and truly excellent master. Moreover, he showed very good judgment in the painting of his figures, whereby he executed them with such unity that they fell back into the distance little by little, in such a way that they did not cling either to the buildings or to the landscapes, and had the appearance of being painted on panel, or rather in relief. He showed invention and variety in the composition of scenes, making them rich and well grouped, and he rendered easy the process of making such pictures as are put together out of pieces of glass, which was held to be very difficult, as indeed it is for one who has not his skill and dexterity. He designed the pictures for his windows with such good method and order that the mountings of lead and iron, which crossed them in certain places, were so well suited into the joinings of the figures and the folds of the draperies that they cannot be seen. Nay, they gave the whole such grace that the brush could not have done more, and thus he was able to make a virtue of necessity. Guglielmo used only 2 kinds of colour for the shading of such glass as he proposed to subject to the action of fire. One was scale of iron, and the other scale of copper. That of iron, which is dark, served to shade draperies, hair, and buildings, and the other, that of copper, which produces a tawny tint, served for flesh colours. He also made much use of a hard stone that comes from Flanders and France, called at the present day hematite, which is red in colour and is much employed for burnishing gold. This, having first been pounded in a bronze mortar and then ground with an iron brazing instrument on a plate of copper or yellow brass and tempered with gum, works divinely well on glass. When Guglielmo first arrived in Rome, he was no great draughtsman, although he was well practised in every other respect. But having recognized the need of this, he applied himself to the study of drawing, in spite of his being well advanced in years, and thus, little by little, he achieved the improvement that is evident in the windows that he afterwards made for the palace of the said Cardinal at Cortona, and for the other without the city, in a round window that is in the aforesaid Pieve, over the façade on the right hand as one enters the church, wherein are the arms of Pope Leo X, and likewise in 2 little windows that are in the company of Gesù, in one of which is a Christ, and in the other a San Onofrio. These are no little different from his early works, and much better. Now, while Guglielmo, as has been related, was living in Cortona, there died at Arezzo one Fabiano di Stagio Sassoli, an Aretine, who had been a very good master of the making of large windows. Thereupon the wardens of works for the Vescovado gave the commission for 3 windows in the principal chapel, each 20 braccia in height, to Stagio, the son of the said Fabiano, and to the painter Domenico Puligo. But when these were finished and fixed in their places, they gave no great satisfaction to the Aretines, although they were passing good and rather worthy of praise than otherwise. It happened at this time that Messer Lodovico Bellechini, an excellent physician and one of the first men in the government of the city of Arezzo, went to Cortona to cure the mother of the aforesaid cardinal, and there he became well acquainted with our Guglielmo, with whom, when he had time, he was very willing to converse. And Guglielmo, who was then called the prior, from his having received about that time the benefice of a priory, likewise conceived an affection for that physician, who asked him one day whether, with the good will of the cardinal, he would go to Arezzo to execute some windows, at which Guglielmo promised that he would, and with the permission and good will of the cardinal, he made his way to that city. Now Stagio, of whom we have spoken above, having parted from the company of Domenico, received Guglielmo into his house, and the latter, for his first work, executed for a window of the chapel of Santa Lucia, belonging to the Albergotti, in the Vescovado of Arezzo, that saint and a Saint Sylvester, in so good a manner that the work may truly be said to be made from living figures, and not of coloured and transparent glass, or at least to be a picture worthy of praise and marvellous. For besides the mastery shown in the flesh colours, the glasses are flashed. That is, in some places the first skin has been removed, and the glass then coloured with another tint, by which is meant, for example, the placing of yellow over red flashed glass, or the application of white and green over blue, which is a difficult and even miraculous thing in this craft. The first or true colour, then, such as red, blue, or green, covers the whole of one side, and the other part, which is as thick as the blade of a knife, or a little more, is white. Many, being afraid that they might break the glasses on account of their lack of skill in handling them, do not employ a pointed iron for removing that layer, but in place of this, for greater safety, set about grinding the glasses with a copper wheel fixed on the end of an iron instrument, and thus, little by little, by the use of emery, they contrive to leave only a layer of white glass, which turns out very clear. Then, if a yellow colour has to be applied to the piece of glass thus left white, at the moment when it is to be placed into the furnace for firing, it is painted by means of a brush with calcined silver, which is a colour similar to bole, but somewhat thick, and in the fire this melts over the glass, fuses, and takes a firm hold, penetrating into the glass and making a very beautiful yellow. These methods of working no one used better or with more ingenuity and art than Prior Guglielmo, and it is in these things that the difficulty consists, for painting the glass with oil colours or in any other manner is little or nothing. In that it should be diaphanous or transparent is not a matter of much importance, whereas firing it in the furnace and making it such that it will withstand the action of water and remain fresh for ever is a difficult work and well worthy of praise. Wherefore this excellent master deserves the highest praise, since there is not a man of his profession who has done as much, whether in design or invention or colouring or general excellence. He then made the great round window of the same church, containing the descent of the Holy Spirit, and likewise the baptism of Christ by St. John, wherein he represented Christ in Jordan, awaiting St. John, who has taken a cup of water in order to baptize him, while a nude old man is taking off his shoes, and some angels are preparing Christ's raiment, and on high is the Father, sending down the Holy Spirit upon his Son. This window is over the baptismal font of that Duomo, for which he also executed the window containing the resurrection of Lazarus on the 4th day after death, wherein it seems impossible that he could have included in so small a space such a number of figures, in which may be recognized the terror and amazement of the people, with the stench from the body of Lazarus, whose resurrection causes his 2 sisters to rejoice amid their tears. In this work are innumerable colours, flashed one over the other in the glass, and every least thing truly appears most natural in its own kind. And whoever wishes to learn how much the hand of the prior was able to effect in his art should study the window of St. Matthew over the chapel of that apostle, and observe the marvellous invention of that scene, wherein he can see a living figure of Christ calling Matthew from his tables, while Matthew, following him and stretching out his arms to receive him, abandons the riches and treasures that he has acquired. And at the same time an apostle may be seen in a very spirited attitude, awaking another who has fallen asleep on some steps, and in like manner there may also be perceived a St. Peter speaking with St. John, both being so beautiful that they seem truly divine. In this same window are temples in perspective, staircases and figures so well grouped, and landscapes so natural that one would never think it was glass, but rather a thing rained down from heaven for the consolation of mankind. In the same place he made the windows of St. Anthony and of St. Nicholas, both most beautiful, with two others, one containing the scene of Christ driving the traders from the temple, and the other that of the woman taken in adultery, all these works being held to be truly excellent and marvellous. So fully were the labours and abilities of the prior recognized by the Aretines, what with praises, favours, and rewards, and so satisfied and contented was he by this result, that he resolved to adopt that city as his home, and to change himself from a Frenchman into an Aretine. Afterwards, reflecting in his own mind that the art of glass painting, on account of the destruction that takes place every moment in such works, was no lasting one, there came to him a desire to devote himself to painting, and he therefore undertook to execute for the wardens of works of the Vescovado in that city 3 very large vaults in fresco, thinking thus to leave a memorial of himself behind him. The Aretines, in return for this, presented to him a farm that belonged to the confraternity of Santa Maria della Misericordia near their city, with some excellent houses for his enjoyment during his lifetime. And they ordained that when the work was finished, its value should be estimated by some distinguished craftsman, and that the wardens should make this good to him in full. Whereupon he made up his mind to show his worth in this undertaking, and he made his figures very large on account of the height, after the manner of the works of Michelangelo's chapel. And so mightily did his wish to become excellent in such an art avail in him, that although he was 50 years of age, he improved little by little in such a manner that he showed that his knowledge and comprehension of the beautiful were not less than his delight in imitating the good in the execution of his work. He went on to represent the earlier events of the New Testament, even as in the 3 large works he had depicted the beginning of the Old. For this reason, therefore, I am inclined to believe that any man of genius who has the desire to attain to perfection is able, if he will but take the pains, to make naught of the limits of any science. At the beginning of those works, indeed, he was alarmed by their size, and because he had never executed any before, which was the reason that he sent to Rome for Maestro Giovanni, a French miniaturist, who, coming to Arezzo, painted over San Antonio an arch with a Christ in fresco, and for that company the banner that is carried in processions, which he executed with great diligence, having received the commission for them from the prior. At the same time Guglielmo made the round window for the façade of the church of San Francesco, a great work, in which he represented the Pope in consistory with the conclave of cardinals, and St. Francis going to Rome for the confirmation of his rule, and bearing the roses of January. In this work he proved what a master of composition he was, so that it may be said with truth that he was born for that profession, nor may any craftsman ever think to equal him in beauty, in abundance of figures, or in grace. There are innumerable windows executed by him throughout that city, all most beautiful, such as the great round window in the Madonna delle Lacrime, containing the Assumption of Our Lady and the Apostles, and a very beautiful window with an Annunciation, a round window with the Marriage of the Virgin, and another containing a St. Jerome executed for the Spadari, and likewise 3 other windows below in various parts of the church, with a most beautiful round window with the Nativity of Christ in the church of San Girolamo, and another in San Rocco. He sent some also to various places, such as Castiglione del Lago, and one to Florence for Lodovico Capponi, to be set up in Santa Felicita, where there is the panel by Jacopo da Pontormo, a most excellent painter, and the chapel adorned by him with mural paintings in oils and in fresco, and with panel pictures, which window came into the hands of the Frati Ingesuati in Florence, who worked at that craft, and they took it all to pieces in order to learn how it was made, removing many pieces as specimens and replacing them with new ones, so that in the end they made quite a different window. He also conceived the wish to paint in oils, and for the chapel of the Conception in San Francesco at Arezzo he executed a panel picture wherein are some vestments very well painted, and many heads most lifelike, and so beautiful that he was honoured thereby ever afterwards, seeing that this was the first work he had ever done in oils. The prior was a very honourable person, and delighted in agriculture and in making alterations in buildings. Wherefore, having bought a most beautiful house, he made in it a vast number of improvements. As a man of religion, he was always most upright in his ways, and the remorse of conscience on account of his departure from his convent kept him sorely afflicted. For which reason he made a very beautiful window for the chapel of the high altar in San Domenico, a convent of his order at Arezzo, wherein he depicted a vine that issues from the body of San Dominic, and embraces a great number of sanctified friars, who constitute the tree of the order, and at the highest point is Our Lady with Christ, who is marrying St. Catherine of Siena, a work much extolled and of great mastery, for which he would accept no payment, believing himself to be much indebted to that order. He sent a very beautiful window to San Lorenzo in Perugia, and an endless number of others to many places around Arezzo. And because he took much pleasure in matters of architecture, he made for the citizens of that country a number of designs of buildings and adornments for their city, such as the 2 doors of San Rocco in stone, and the ornament of grey stone that was added to the panel picture of Maestro Luca in San Girolamo. And he designed an ornament in the Abbey of Cipriano d'Anghiari, and another for the Company of the Trinità in the chapel of the Crocifisso, and a very rich lavatory for the sacristy, which were all executed with great perfection by the stone cutter Santi. Finally, ever delighting in labour, and continually working both winter and summer at his mural painting, which breaks down the healthiest of men, he became so afflicted by the damp and so swollen with dropsy that his physicians had to tap him, and in a few days he rendered up his soul to him who had given it. First, like a good Christian, he partook of the sacraments of the Church and made his will. Then, having a particular devotion for the hermits of Camaldoli, who have their seat on the summit of the Apennines, 20 miles distant from Arezzo, he bequeathed to them his property and his body, and to Pastorino da Siena, his assistant, who had been with him many years, he left his glasses, his working instruments, and his designs, of which there is one in our book, a scene of the submersion of Pharaoh in the Red Sea. This Pastorino afterwards applied himself to many other fields of art, and also to glass windows, although the works that he produced in that craft were but few. Guglielmo was much imitated also by one Maso Porro of Cortona, who was more able in firing and putting together the glass than in painting it. One of the pupils of Guglielmo was Battista Borro of Arezzo, who continues to imitate him greatly in the making of windows, and he also taught the first rudiments to Benedetto Spadari and to Giorgio Vasari of Arezzo. The prior lived 62 years and died in the year 1537. He deserves infinite praise in that by him there was brought into Tuscany the art of working in glass with the greatest mastery and delicacy that could be desired. Wherefore, since he conferred such great benefits upon us, we also will pay him honor, and exalting him continually with loving and unceasing praise, both for his life and for his works. End of chapter 25.
Chapter 26 of Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary J. Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4 by Giorgio Vasari. Translated by Gaston du VERE. Life of Simone, called Il Cronaca. Simone del Pollaiuolo, architect of Florence. Many intellects are lost that would make rare and worthy works, if, on coming into the world, they were hit upon persons able and willing to set them to work on those labors for which they are fitted. But it often happens that he who has the means is neither capable nor willing, and if indeed there chances to be one willing to erect some worthy building, he often takes no manner of care to seek out an architect of real merit, or of any loftiness of spirit. Nay, he puts his honor and glory into the keeping of certain thievish creatures, who generally disgrace the name and fame of such memorials, and in order to thrust forward into greatness those who depend entirely upon him, so great is the power of ambition, he often rejects the good designs that are offered to him, and puts into execution the very worst. Wherefore his own fame is left besmirched by the clumsiness of the work, since it is considered by all men of judgment that the craftsman and the patron who employs him, in that they are conjoined in their works, are of one and the same mind. And on the other hand, how many princes of little understanding have there been who, through having chanced upon persons of excellence and judgment, have obtained after death no less fame from the memory of their buildings than they enjoyed when alive from the sovereignty over their people. Truly fortunate, however, in his day was Cronaca, in that he not only had the knowledge, but also found those who kept him continually employed, and that was always on great and magnificent works. Of him it is related that while Antonio Pollaiuolo was in Rome, working at the tombs of bronze that are in San Pietro, there came to his house a young lad, his relative, whose proper name was Simone, and who had fled from Florence on account of some brawl. This Simone, having worked with a master in woodwork, and being much inclined to the art of architecture, began to observe the beautiful antiquities of that city, and, delighting in them, went about measuring them with the greatest diligence. And, going on with this, he had not been long in Rome before he showed that he had made much proficience, both in taking measurements and in carrying one or two things into execution. Thereupon he conceived the idea of returning to Florence, and departed from Rome, and on arriving in his native city, having become a passing good master of words, he described the marvels of Rome and of other places with such accuracy that from that time onwards he was called Il Cronaca, every man thinking that he was truly a chronicle of information in his discourse. Now he had become such that he was held to be the most excellent of the modern architects in the city of Florence, seeing that he had good judgment in choosing sites, and showed that he had an intellect more lofty than that of many others who were engaged in that profession, for it was evident from his works how good an imitator he was of antiquities, and how closely he observed the rules of Vitruvius and the works of Filippo di Ser Brunellesco. There was then in Florence that Filippo Strozzi, who is now called the Elder, to distinguish him from his son, and he, being very rich, wished to leave to his native city and to his children, among other memorials of himself, one in the form of a beautiful palace. Wherefore Benedetto da Maiano, having been called upon by him for this purpose, made him a model entirely isolated, which was afterwards put into execution, although not in all its extent, as will be related below, for some of his neighbours would not give up their houses to accommodate him. Benedetto began the palace, therefore, in the best way that he could, and brought the outer shell almost to completion before the death of Filippo, which outer shell is in the rustic order, with varying degrees of rustication, as may be seen, since the boss-covered part from the first range of windows downwards, together with the doors, is very much rustic, and the part from the first range of windows to the second is much less rustic. Now it happened that at the very moment when Benedetto was leaving Florence, Cronaca returned from Rome, whereupon Simone, being presented to Filippo, the latter was so pleased with the model that he made for the courtyard, and for the great cornice which goes round the outer side of the palace, that, having recognized the excellence of his intellect, he decided thenceforward the whole work should pass through his hands, and availed himself of his services ever afterwards. Cronaca then, in addition to the beautiful exterior in the Tuscan order, made at the top a very magnificent Corinthian cornice, which serves to complete the roof, and half of it is seen finished at the present day, with such extraordinary grace that nothing could be added to it, nor could anything more beautiful be desired. This cornice was taken by Cronaca, who copied it in Rome with exact measurements from an ancient one that is to be found at Spoglia Cristo, which is held to be the most beautiful among the many that are in that city, although it is true that it was enlarged by Cronaca to the proportions required by the palace, to the end that it might make for a suitable finish, and might also complete the roof of that palace by means of its projection. Thus, then, the genius of Cronaca was able to make use of the works of others, and to transform them almost into his own, which does not succeed with many, since the difficulty lies not in merely having drawings and copies of beautiful things, but in accommodating them to the purpose which they have to serve, with grace, true measurement, proportion, and fitness. But just as much as this cornice of Cronaca's was and always will be extolled, so was that one censured which was made for the palace of the Bartolini in the same city by Baccio d'Agnolo, who, seeking to imitate Cronaca, placed over a small façade, delicate in detail, a great ancient cornice, copied with the exact measurements from the frontispiece of Monte Cavallo, which resulted in such ugliness from his not having known how to adapt it with judgment, that it could not look worse, for it seems like an enormous cap on a small head. It is not enough for craftsmen, when they have executed their works, to excuse themselves, as many do, by saying that they were taken with exact measurements from the antique and copied from good masters, seeing that good judgment and the eye play a greater part in all such matters than measuring with compasses. Cronaca then executed half of the said cornice with great art right round that palace, together with dentils and ovoli, and finished it completely on 2 sides, counterposing the stones in such a way, in order that they might turn out well bound and balanced, that there is no better masonry to be seen, nor any carried to perfection with more diligence. In like manner, all the other stones are so well put together, and with so high a finish, that the whole does not appear to be of masonry, but rather all of one piece. And to the end that everything might be in keeping, he caused beautiful pieces of ironwork to be made for all parts of the palace as adornments for it, and the lanterns that are at the corners, which were all executed with supreme diligence by Niccolò Grosso, called Il Caparra, a smith of Florence. In those marvellous lanterns may be seen cornices, columns, capitals, and brackets of iron, fixed together with wonderful craftsmanship. Nor has any modern ever executed in iron works so large and so difficult, and with such knowledge and mastery. Niccolò Grosso was an eccentric and self-willed person, claiming justice for himself and giving it to others, and never covetous of what was not his own. He would never give anyone credit in the payment of his works, and always insisted on having his earnest money. For this reason, Lorenzo de' Medici called him Il Caparra. He was known to many others by that name. He had a sign fixed over his shop, wherein were books burning. Wherefore, when one asked for time to make his payment, he would say, "I cannot give it, for my books are burning, and I can enter no more debtors in them." He was commissioned by the honourable captains of the Guelph party to make a pair of andirons, which, when he had finished them, were sent for several times. But he kept saying, "On this anvil I do sweat and labour, and on it I will have my money paid down." Whereupon they sent to him once more for the work, with a message that he should come for his money, for he would straightway be paid. But he, still obstinate, answered that they must first bring the money. The proveditore, therefore, knowing that the captains wished to see the work, fell into a rage, and sent to him, saying that he had received half the money, and that when he had dispatched the andirons he would pay him the rest. On which account Caparra, recognizing that this was true, gave one of the andirons to the messenger, saying, "Take them this one, for it is theirs, and if it pleases them, bring me the rest of the money, and I will hand over the other, but at the present it is mine." The officials, seeing the marvellous work that he had put into it, sent the money to his shop, and he sent them the other andiron. It is related also that Lorenzo de' Medici resolved to have some pieces of ironwork made to be sent abroad as presents, in order that the excellence of Caparra might be made known. He went, therefore, to his shop, and happened to find him working on some things for certain poor people, from whom he had received part of the price as earnest money. On Lorenzo making his request, Niccolò would in no way promise to serve him before having satisfied the others, saying that they had come to his shop before Lorenzo, and that he valued their money as much as his. To the same master some young men of the city brought a design, from which he was to make for them an iron instrument for breaking and forcing open other irons by means of a screw, but he absolutely refused to serve them. Nay, he upbraided them, saying, "Nothing will induce me to serve you in such a matter, for these things are nothing but thieves' tools, or instruments for abducting and dishonouring young girls. Such things are not for me, I tell you, nor for you, who seem to me to be honest men." And they, perceiving that Caparra would not do their will, asked him who there was in Florence who might serve them, whereupon, flying into a rage, he drove them away with a torrent of abuse. He would never work for Jews, and was wont indeed to say that their money was putrid and stinking. He was a good man and a religious, but whimsical in brain and obstinate, and he would never leave Florence for all the offers that were made to him, but lived and died in that city. Of him I have thought it right to make this record, because he was truly unique in his craft, and has never had and never will have an equal, as may be seen best from the ironwork and the beautiful lanterns of the Palace of the Strozzi. This palace was brought to completion by Cronaca, and adorned with a very rich courtyard in the Corinthian and Doric orders, with ornaments in the form of columns, capitals, cornices, windows, and doors, all most beautiful. And if it should appear to anyone that the interior of this palace is not in keeping with the exterior, he must know that the fault is not Cronaca's, for the reason that he was forced to adapt his interior to an outer shell begun by others, and to follow in great measure what had been laid down by those before him, and it was no small feat for him to have given it such beauty as it displays. The same answer may be made to any who say that the ascent of the stairs is not easy, nor correct in proportion, but too steep and sudden, and likewise also to such as say that the rooms and apartments of the interior in general are out of keeping, as has been described, with the grandeur and magnificence of the exterior. Nevertheless, this palace will never be held as other than truly magnificent, and equal to any private building whatsoever that has been erected in Italy in our own times. Wherefore Cronaca rightly obtained, as he still does, infinite commendation for this work. The same master built the sacristy of Santo Spirito in Florence, which is in the form of an octagonal temple, beautiful in proportions, and executed with a high finish, and among other things to be seen in this work are some capitals fashioned by the happy hand of Andrea da Monte Sansovino, which are wrought with supreme perfection. And such likewise is the antechamber of that sacristy, which is held to be very beautiful in invention, although the coffered ceiling, as will be described, is not well distributed over the columns. The same Cronaca also erected the church of San Francesco dell'Osservanza on the hill of San Miniato, without Florence, and likewise the whole of the convent of the Servite Friars, which is a highly extolled work. At this same time there was to be built, by the advice of Fra Girolamo Savonarola, a most famous preacher of that day, the great council chamber of the palace of the Signoria in Florence. And for this opinions were taken from Leonardo da Vinci, Michelagnolo Buonarroti, although he was a mere lad, Giuliano da San Gallo, Baccio d'Agnolo, and Simone da Pollaiuolo, called Il Cronaca, who was the devoted friend and follower of Savonarola. These men, after many disputes, came to an agreement, and decided that the hall should be made in that form which it retained down to our times, when, as has been mentioned and will be related yet again in another place, it was almost rebuilt. The charge of the whole work was given to Cronaca, as a man of talent, and also as the friend of the aforesaid Fra Girolamo, and he executed it with great promptitude and diligence, showing the beauty of his genius particularly in the making of the roof, since the structure is of vast extent in every direction. He made the tie beams and the roof truss, which are 38 braccia in length from wall to wall, of a number of timbers well scarfed and fastened together, since it was not possible to find beams of sufficient size for the purpose. And whereas the tie beams of the other roof trusses have only one king post, all those of this hall have 3 each, a king post in the middle and a queen post on either side. The rafters are long in proportion, and so are the struts of each king post and queen post. Nor must I omit to say that the struts of the queen posts, on the side nearest the wall, thrust against the rafters, and, towards the centre, against the struts of the king post. I have thought it right to describe how this roof truss is made, because it was constructed with beautiful design, and I have seen drawings made of it by many for sending to various places. When these tie beams, thus contrived, had been drawn up and placed at intervals of 6 braccia, the roof had been likewise laid down in a very short space of time. Cronaca attended to the fixing of the ceiling, which was then made of plain wood and divided into panels, each of which was 4 braccia square, and surrounded by an ornamental cornice of few members, and a flat moulding was made of the same width as the planks, which enclosed the panels and the whole work, with large bosses at the intersections, and the corners of the whole ceiling. And although the end walls of this hall, one on either side, were 8 braccia out of the square, they did not make up their minds, as they might have done, to thicken the walls so as to make it square, but carried them up to the roof just as they were, making 3 large windows on each of those end walls. But when the whole was finished, the hall, on account of its extraordinary size, turned out to be too dark, and also stunted and wanting in height in relation to its great length and breadth. In short, almost wholly out of proportion. They sought, therefore, but with little success, to improve it by making 2 windows in the middle of the eastern side of the hall, and 4 on the western side. After this, in order to give it its final completion, they made on the level of the brick floor, with great rapidity, being much pressed by the citizens, a wooden tribune, right round the walls of the hall, 3 braccia, both in breadth and height, with seats after the manner of a theatre, and with a balustrade in front, on which tribune all the magistrates of the city were to sit. In the middle of the eastern side was a more elevated dais, on which the signori sat with the gonfaloniere of justice, and on either side of this more prominent place was a door, one of them leading to the segreto and the other to the specchio. Opposite to this, on the west side, was an altar at which Mass was read, with a panel by the hand of Fra Bartolomeo, as has been mentioned, and beside the altar was a pulpit for making speeches. In the middle of the hall, then, were benches and rows laid crossways for the citizens, while in the centre and at the corners of the tribune were some gangways with 6 steps, providing a convenient ascent for the ushers in the collection of votes. In this hall, which was much extolled at that day for its many beautiful features and the rapidity with which it was erected, time has since served to reveal such errors as that it is low, dark, gloomy, and out of the square. Nevertheless, Cronaca and the others deserve to be excused, both on account of the haste with which it was executed at the desire of the citizens, who intended in time to have it adorned with pictures and the ceiling overlaid with gold, and because up to that day there had been no greater hall built in Italy, although there are others very large, such as that of the Palace of San Marco in Rome, that of the Vatican, erected by Pius II and Innocent VIII, that of the Castle of Naples, that of the Palace of Milan, and those of Urbino, Venice, and Padua. After this, to provide an ascent to this hall, Cronaca, with the advice of the same masters, made a great staircase 6 braccia wide and curving in 2 flights, richly adorned with grey stone, and with Corinthian pilasters and capitals, double cornices, and arches of the same stone, and with barrel-shaped vaulting, and windows with columns of variegated marble and carved marble capitals. But although this work was much extolled, it would have won even greater praise if the staircase had not turned out inconvenient and too steep, for it is a sure fact that it could have been made more gentle, as has been done in the time of Duke Cosimo, within the same amount of space and no more, in the new staircase made opposite to that of Cronaca by Giorgio Vasari, which is so gentle an ascent and so convenient that going up it is almost like walking on the level. This has been the work of the aforesaid Lord Duke Cosimo, who, being a man of most happy genius and most profound judgment, both in the government of his people and in all other things, grudges neither expense nor anything else in his desire to make all the fortifications and other buildings, both public and private, correspond to the greatness of his own mind, and not less beautiful than useful, or less useful than beautiful. His Excellency, then, reflecting that the body of this hall is the largest, the most magnificent, and the most beautiful in all Europe, has resolved to have it improved in such parts as are defective, and to have it made in every other part more ornate than any other structure in Italy, by the design and hand of Giorgio Vasari of Arezzo, and thus, the walls having been raised 12 braccia above their former height, in such a manner that the height from the pavement to the ceiling is 32 braccia, the roof truss made by Cronaca to support the roof has been restored and replaced on high after a new arrangement. And the old ceiling, which was simple and commonplace, and by no means worthy of that hall, has been remodelled with a system of compartments of great variety, rich in mouldings, full of carvings, and all overlaid with gold, together with 39 painted panels, square, round, and octagonal, the greater numbers of which are each 9 braccia in extent, and some even more, and all containing scenes painted in oils, with the largest figures 7 or 8 braccia high. In these stories, commencing with the very beginning, may be seen the rise, the honours, the victories, and the glorious deeds of the city and state of Florence, and in particular the wars of Pisa and Siena, together with an endless number of other things, which it would take too long to describe. And on each of the side walls there has been left a convenient space of 60 braccia, in each of which are to be painted 3 scenes in keeping with the ceiling, and embracing the space of 7 pictures on either side, which represent events from the wars of Pisa and Siena. These compartments on the walls are so large that no greater spaces for painting of historical pictures have ever been seen either by the ancients or the moderns. And the said compartments are adorned by some vast stone ornaments, which meet at the ends of the hall, at one side of which, namely the northern side, the Lord Duke has caused to be finished a work begun and carried nearly to completion by Baccio Bandinelli, that is, a façade filled with columns and pilasters, and with niches containing statues of marble, which space is to serve as a public audience chamber, as will be related in the proper place. On the other side, opposite to this, there is to be, in a similar façade that is being made by the sculptor and architect Amanati, a fountain to throw up water in the hall, with a rich and most beautiful adornment of columns and statues of marble and bronze. Nor will I forbear to say that this hall, in consequence of the roof having been raised 12 braccia, has gained not only height, but also an ample supply of windows, since, in addition to the others that are higher up, in each of those end walls are to be made 3 large windows, which will be over the level of a corridor that is to form a loggia within the hall, and to extend on one side over the work of Bandinelli, whence there will be revealed a most beautiful view of the whole piazza. But of this hall, and of the other improvements that have been or are being made in the palace, There will be a longer account in another place. This only let me say at present, that if Cronaca and those other ingenious craftsmen who gave the design for the hall could return to life, in my belief they would not recognize either the palace or the hall, or any other thing that is there. The hall, namely, and that part which is rectangular, without counting the works of Bandinelli and Amanati, is 90 braccia in length and 38 braccia in breadth. But returning to Cronaca, in the last years of his life there entered into his head such a frenzy for the cause of Fra Girolamo Savonarola that he would talk of nothing else but that. Living thus, in the end he died after a passing long illness, at the age of 55, and was buried honourably in the church of Sant'Ambrogio at Florence in the year 1509, and after no long space of time the following epitaph was written for him by Messer Giovan Battista Strozzi. Cronaca. Vivo. E mille anni e mille ancora, mercé dei vivi miei palazzi e tempi, bella Roma, vivrà l'alma mia flora. Cronaca had a brother called Matteo, who gave himself to sculpture and worked under the sculptor Antonio Rossellino. But although he was a man of good and beautiful intelligence and a fine draftsman, and well practised in working marble, he left no finished work, because, being snatched from the world by death at the age of 19, he was not able to accomplish that which was expected from him by all who knew him. End of chapter 26.
Chapter 27 of Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4 by Giorgio Vasari. Translated by Gaston de VERE. Life of Domenico Puligo, painter of Florence. It is a marvelous and almost incredible thing that many followers of the art of painting, through continual practice and handling of colors, either by an instinct of nature or by the trick of good manner, acquired without any draftsmanship or grounding, carry their works to such thorough completion, and very often contrive to make them so good that although the craftsmen themselves may be none of the rarest, their pictures force the world to extol them and to hold them in supreme veneration. And it has been perceived in the past from many examples, and in many of our painters, that the most vivacious and perfect works are produced by those who have a beautiful manner from nature, although they must exercise it with continual study and labor. Well, this gift of nature has such power that even if they neglect or abandon the studies of art and pay attention to nothing save the mere practice of painting and of handling colors with the grace infused in them by nature, at the first glance their works have the appearance of displaying all the excellent and marvelous qualities that are wont to appear after a close inspection in the works of those masters whom we hold to be the best. And that this is true is demonstrated to us in our own day by experience from the works of Domenico Puligo, a painter of Florence, wherein what has been said above may be clearly recognized by one who has knowledge of the matters of art. While Ridolfo, the son of Domenico Ghirlandajo, was executing a number of works in painting at Florence, as will be related, he followed his father's habit of always keeping many young men painting in his workshop, which was the reason that not a few of them, through competing one with another, became very good masters, some at making portraits from life, some at working in fresco, others in distemper, and others at painting readily on cloth. Making these lads execute pictures, panels, and canvases in the course of a few years, Ridolfo, with great profit for himself, sent an endless number of these to England, to Germany, and to Spain. Baccio Gotti and Toto del Nunziata, disciples of Ridolfo, were summoned, one to France by King Francis, and the other to England by the king of that country, each of whom invited them after having seen some of their work. Two other disciples of the same master remained with him, working under him for many years, because although they had many invitations into Spain and Hungary from merchants and others, they were never induced either by promises or by money to tear themselves away from the delights of their country, in which they had more work to do than they were able to execute. One of these two was Antonio del Ceraiuolo, a Florentine, who, having been many years with Lorenzo di Credi, had learnt from him, above all, to draw so well from nature that with supreme facility he gave his portraits an extraordinary likeness to the life, although otherwise he was no great draughtsman, and I have seen some heads portrayed from life by his hand, which, although they have, for example, the nose crooked, one lip small and the other large, and other such like deformities, nevertheless resemble the life, through his having well caught the expression of the subject, whereas, on the other hand, many excellent masters have made pictures and portraits of absolute perfection with regard to art, but with no resemblance whatever to those that they are supposed to represent. And to tell the truth, he who executes portraits must contrive, without thinking of what is looked for in a perfect figure, to make them like those for whom they are intended. When portraits are like and also beautiful, then may they be called rare works, and their authors truly excellent craftsmen. This Antonio, then, besides many portraits, executed a number of panel pictures in Florence, but for the sake of brevity I will make mention only of two. One of these, wherein he painted a crucifixion with St. Mary Magdalene and St. Francis, is in San Jacopo tra Fossi, on the Canto degli Alberti, and in the other, which is in the Nunziata, is a St. Michael who is weighing souls. The other of the two aforesaid disciples was Domenico Puligo, who was more excellent in draughtsmanship and more pleasing and gracious in colouring than any of the others mentioned above. He, considering that his method of painting with softness, without overloading his works with colour or making them hard, but causing the distances to recede little by little as though veiled with a kind of mist, gave his pictures both relief and grace, and that although the outlines of the figures that he made were lost in such a way that his errors were concealed and hidden from view in the dark grounds into which the figures merged, nevertheless his colouring and the beautiful expressions of the heads made his works pleasing, always kept to the same method of working and to the same manner, which caused him to be held in esteem as long as he lived. But omitting to give an account of the pictures and portraits that he made while in the workshop of Ridolfo, some of which were sent abroad and some remained in the city, I shall speak only of those which he painted when he was rather the friend and rival of Ridolfo than his disciple, and of those that he executed when he was so much the friend of Andrea del Sarto that nothing was more dear to him than to see that master in his workshop, in order to learn from him, showing him his works and asking his opinion of them, so as to avoid such errors and defects as those men often fall into who do not show their work to any other craftsman, but trust so much in their own judgment that they would rather incur the censure of all the world when those works are finished than correct them by means of suggestions of loving friends. One of the first things that Domenico executed was a very beautiful picture of Our Lady for Messer Agnolo della Stufa, who has it in his abbey of Capalona in the district of Arezzo, and holds it very dear for the great diligence of its execution and the beauty of its colouring. He painted another picture of Our Lady, no less beautiful than that one, for Messer Agnolo Niccolini, now Archbishop of Pisa and a cardinal, who keeps it in his house on the Canto dei Pazzi in Florence, and likewise another of equal size and excellence, which is now in the possession of Filippo dell'Antella at Florence. In another, which is about 3 braccia in height, Domenico made a full-length Madonna with the Child between her knees, a little St. John, and another head, and this picture, which is held to be one of the best works that he executed, since there is no sweeter colouring to be seen, is at the present day in the possession of Messer Filippo Spini, treasurer to the most illustrious Prince of Florence, and a gentleman of magnificent spirit who takes much delight in works of painting. Among other portraits that Domenico made from the life, which are all beautiful and also good likenesses, the most beautiful is the one which he painted of Monsignore Messer Piero Carnesecchi, at that time a marvellously handsome youth, for whom he also made some other pictures, all very beautiful and executed with much diligence. In like manner he portrayed in a picture the Florentine Barbara, a famous and most lovely courtesan of that day, much beloved by many no less for her fine culture than for her beauty, and particularly because she was an excellent musician and sang divinely. But the best work that Domenico ever executed was a large picture wherein he made a life-size Madonna with some angels and little boys, and a Saint Bernard who was writing, which picture is now in the hands of Giovanni Gualberto del Giocondo and of his brother Messer Nicolo, a canon of San Lorenzo in Florence. The same master made many other pictures which are dispersed among the houses of citizens, and in particular some wherein may be seen a half-length figure of Cleopatra, causing an asp to bite her on the breast, and others wherein is the Roman Lucretia killing herself with a dagger. There are also some very beautiful portraits from life and pictures by the same hand at the Porta a Pinti, in the house of Giulio Scali, a man whose judgment is as fine in the matters of our arts as it is in those of every other most noble and most honourable profession. Domenico executed for Francesco del Giocondo, in a panel for his chapel in the great tribune of the Church of the Servi at Florence, a Saint Francis who is receiving the Stigmata, which work is very sweet and soft in colouring and wrought with much diligence. In the Church of Cestello, round the Tabernacle of the Sacrament, he painted 2 angels in fresco, and on the panel of a chapel in the same church he made a Madonna with her Son in her arms, St. John the Baptist, St. Bernard, and other saints. And since it appeared to the monks of the place that he had acquitted himself very well in those works, they caused him to paint in a cloister of their abbey of Settimo, without Florence, the visions of Count Ugo, who built 7 abbeys. And no long time after, Puligo painted in a shrine at the corner of the Via Mozza da Santa Catarina a Madonna standing with her Son in her arms, marrying St. Catherine, and a figure of St. Peter Martyr. For a company in the township of Anghiari he executed a Deposition from the Cross, which may be numbered among his best works. But since it was his profession to attend rather to pictures of Our Lady, portraits, and other heads than to great works, he gave up almost all his time to such things. Now, if he had devoted himself not so much to the pleasures of the world as he did, and more to the labours of art, there is no doubt that he would have made great proficience in painting, and especially as Andrea del Sarto, who was much his friend, assisted him on many occasions, both with advice and with drawings, for which reason many of his works reveal a draughtsmanship as fine as the good and beautiful manner of the colouring. But the circumstance that Domenico was unwilling to endure such fatigue, and accustomed to labour rather in order to get through work and make money than for the sake of fame, prevented him from reaching a greater height. And thus, associating with gay spirits and lovers of good cheer, and with musicians and women, he died at the age of 52, in the year 1527, in the pursuit of a love affair, having caught the plague at the house of his mistress. Colour was handled by him in so good and harmonious a manner that it is for that reason rather than for any other that he deserves praise. Among his disciples was Domenico Beceri of Florence, who, giving a high finish to his colouring, executed his works in an excellent manner. End of chapter 27. End of Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 4, by Giorgio Vasari, translated by Gaston de VERE, died 1955.